The envelope was still in Christopher's hand when the room went quiet. Not the quiet of a meeting paused or of a door closing on a conversation that had grown too loud. This was the particular quiet that falls when something true has just been spoken into a space full of people who were not ready to hear it. And every person present is taking stock of what it means for them. Christopher stood at the threshold of the partners' conference room on the 4th floor of Whitmore and Vance, holding a manila envelope that no longer seemed to matter, watching Diane's expression do something he had never seen it do in 22 years of knowing her. It cracked, not loudly, not with tears or raised voices or anything that would give her dignity in the falling, just a small, visible fault line, the way plaster splits in a cold house when the temperature changes too fast. And for one moment, the woman who had managed every version of the Carson family story was simply a woman with nowhere to put her hands. That moment was not the beginning. It was the thing the beginning had been quietly building toward, across 3 visits and 2 stairwells, and 1 sentence spoken in a low voice to a stranger who turned out to have been waiting half her life to hear the other half of it. The beginning was a chair. Christopher had been with Whitmore and Vance for 6 years, long enough to know which overhead light in the 2nd floor corridor flickered after 3 in the afternoon, long enough to know that the lobby's 2 guest chairs were the harder ones, and that the padded chair behind the reception desk was the only seat in the building that wouldn't leave a person stiff after an extended wait. He was a probate paralegal, one of 4, assigned primarily to the firm's estate document management work, which meant he spent most of his days in a room full of filing cabinets and the particular smell of paper that has been sealed in an envelope for longer than people anticipated when they wrote what was inside it. He was not unhappy. That distinction mattered, though he would not have articulated it if asked. He had learned the difference between unhappiness and constraint, and what he lived with at Whitmore and Vance was closer to the second. There were senior partners who knew his name and used it correctly, and others who called him Craig. There were clients who thanked him, and clients who did not seem to see him at all, and he had long since made peace with the distribution. He came in at 8:15, collected the morning's intake from the lobby drop box, filed what needed filing, drafted what needed drafting, and left at 5:30 with the clean conscience of a man who had done what he said he would do. Phoebe, the firm's receptionist, was the person he spoke to most in the course of a day, which was partly a function of physical proximity and partly a function of the fact that Phoebe was one of those people who paid attention. She noticed when the coffee in the 2nd floor kitchenette ran out before 10, noticed which clients came in looking composed and left looking hollowed, noticed who held the elevator and who let it close. She had been at the firm 3 years, a little less than half as long as Christopher, and she had never once called him Craig. On a Tuesday in late October, a woman arrived at the lobby carrying a sealed transit case of the kind used for sensitive legal documents, the hard-sided plastic ones with combination locks and tamper-evident seals. She gave her name to Phoebe at the front desk, said she was delivering on behalf of the Ashby estate, and was told that the relevant partner, a man named Gerald Vance, was in a deposition that was running considerably over time. She was welcome to wait, Phoebe told her, though it might be a while. The woman sat in one of the guest chairs with the transit case balanced across her knees and opened a small paperback she had been carrying in her coat pocket. She had dark hair pulled back without ceremony, a coat that was good but not new, and the posture of someone accustomed to waiting without complaint. Christopher came through the lobby at 11:15 on his way to retrieve a document from the intake shelf. He saw Phoebe's expression, which was the expression of a person who feels a mild institutional guilt about something she cannot fix, and followed it to the woman in the chair. He could see from where he stood that the chair's front legs were uneven, a thing he had noticed months ago and reported and which had not yet been addressed, and that the woman was sitting with a slightly tensed spine because of it. He stopped. He considered the stack of documents in his arms and the woman's paperback and the transit case on her knees, and he made a decision that did not feel like a decision so much as a simple recognition of one obvious thing. "The chair behind the desk is better," he said. "Phoebe won't mind. She's at the copier for another 10 minutes. The woman looked up from her book. She had the kind of eyes that take a moment to focus when pulled back from a page, still half inside whatever she had been reading, and she looked at him with a brief, unguarded attention before her expression settled into something more neutral. "I'm fine," she said. "The front left leg is short," he said. "You'll notice it in your lower back before the hour's up." She looked down at the chair, then back at him. Something in her expression shifted, not into warmth exactly, but into a kind of acknowledgement, the look of a person who recognizes that a small truth has been offered to them without obligation. "Thank you," she said. She moved to the desk chair. Christopher went to retrieve his documents. When he came back through the lobby, she was reading again, the transit case now resting properly on the floor beside her, and she did not look up, and he did not expect her to. He left a cup of coffee on the corner of the reception desk before he went back upstairs, next to a small paper sleeve that held 2 of the shortbread biscuits from the tin in the kitchenette. He did not announce it. He simply set it there and went. He did not think about it again until the following Thursday, when Diane called. Diane had been Christopher's sister-in-law for 15 years, his late wife Ellen's older sister, and she had occupied the role of family authority for considerably longer than that. Ellen had died 3 years ago, quietly and then quickly, the way certain illnesses move, and what she had left behind was a modest estate, a 22-year-old family trust, established by her parents before either of their daughters was married, and a complicated silence around a set of documents Christopher had found in Ellen's files 8 months after the funeral, when he finally had the capacity to sort through them. He had not told Diane about the documents. He had not told anyone. He had read them carefully, with the particular attention of a man who spent his professional life reading estate documents, and understood that what he was holding was the kind of thing that families either address together or carry separately for a generation. He had put them back in the folder and held the question of what to do with them for almost 2 years. Diane managed the family trust. This was a practical arrangement, the kind that forms inside families when one person is organized and willing, and everyone else is relieved to have it settled. She filed the annual reports, corresponded with the trust's bank, and held the original documents in a fireproof cabinet in her home office. She also, Christopher had come to understand over the years, held the Carson family story in the same way. She was the one who decided which version of events was the operative version, which history was worth retelling at family gatherings, and which was better left in the past. She did this without cruelty, usually, and almost always without awareness that she was doing it. She called on a Thursday to ask whether Christopher would be coming to the Trust's annual review meeting, which she held each November at her house, around a dining table that seated 8 and usually held only 4. He said he would. She reminded him, with the particular cadence of someone reinforcing a known preference, that it would be helpful if he left the discussion of the Carson side of the Trust's history to her, as she had the fuller picture and didn't want the meeting to get complicated. He said yes. He meant it when he said it. He had been saying yes for 22 years. 3 days after Diane's call, the woman from the lobby returned to Whitmore and Vance. Her name from the delivery log Phoebe kept was M. Ashby. She was carrying the same transit case, resealed, which Christopher understood to mean that whatever had been in it had been reviewed and was being returned or transferred in some form. She was wearing a different coat, charcoal this time, and she had the same paperback in her pocket, its spine now more visibly broken. She remembered the chair. She sat in Phoebe's desk chair before she was invited to, with the naturalness of someone who had noted the offer the first time and decided it was reasonable. Phoebe, who had heard the full account of the first visit from Christopher at the coffee station, smiled at this. Christopher came through the lobby twice during the 2 hours she waited. The first time he was carrying files. The second time he was not, and he stopped. "Still the depositions," he said. "Still the depositions," she said. "Vance is thorough." "I've been told." He looked at the paperback. "Is it good?" She considered this with more genuine attention than the question probably warranted. "It's the second time I've read it. It's better the second time." "What's it about?" "A woman who inherits a house she has never been to," she said. "She spends the whole book trying to decide whether the house is hers or whether she's only been lent it." He thought about that for a moment. "Does she decide?" "Not really," she said. "But by the end you don't mind." He nodded once, the way a person nods when they have received a piece of information they intend to think about later. He went back upstairs. He did think about it later, in the way that small exchanges sometimes lodge without explanation, the way a particular word in a document stays with you while the rest of the page recedes. The partners' monthly briefing was held on the first Friday of each month at 9 in the morning in the conference room on the 4th floor. Christopher was not invited to the briefing itself, but regularly delivered the intake summary folder to Gerald Vance's assistant before it started, which meant passing the conference room's half-open door on his way back to the stairwell. He had done it for 6 years without incident. On the first Friday of November, he made the delivery at 8:50, spoke briefly to Vance's assistant about a probate filing that needed a signature, and was on his way to the stairwell when he heard his own name in the voice of Gerald Vance. He stopped, not deliberately. His feet stopped before his mind made a decision about it, the way a person stops when a sound registers as significant before it has been consciously identified. He stood just past the open door, his back to the wall, holding the intake folder. Diane was speaking. He recognized her voice immediately, the particular measured cadence of it, the way she constructed sentences as if she were placing objects into a cabinet in a specific order. She was telling Gerald Vance about the Carson Family Trust. She was telling him about Ellen's side of the family history. She was telling him in the calm, authoritative voice of a woman who has held a piece of information for a long time and has decided that it now serves a purpose to release it. What she said was this, that before Ellen and Christopher had married, there had been a dispute within the Carson family about the trust's original assets, and that the dispute had involved a disclosure by Christopher's late father that certain documents he had provided to the trust's founding attorney were not original documents but copies with alterations, that the family had handled it privately, that the alterations had been minor in financial terms but significant in terms of what they said about the family's relationship to accurate record-keeping, that she had always felt it was important for Gerald to have a full picture of the people associated with the trust, given that Christopher was now the surviving Carson family member with access to the trust's current filings. She said it carefully. She said it with the measured regret of a woman who takes no pleasure in difficult truths. She said it in the voice she used at trust meetings when she was explaining why a certain approach was the more prudent one. She did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She simply placed the information into the room. Christopher stood in the hallway and felt the floor do something it had no business doing, the way a room goes briefly loose when you've stood up too quickly. He held the folder. He waited for the feeling to pass. It passed slowly, and what it left behind was not anger, which surprised him. It was something quieter and more complete. It was the sensation of having finally understood the dimensions of a room he had been living in for a long time. He knew the story Diane had told. He had known it for 2 years, from the documents in Ellen's files. What he had not known was that Diane had been carrying it as a tool. What he had not known in specific terms was what kind of room she had decided he belonged in, and how long she had been locking it from the outside. He went back to his desk. He sat for a while without opening anything. Then he opened the file he had been working on before the delivery and finished what he had been doing because the work still needed to be done, and he was the person assigned to do it. Phoebe found him at the coffee station at 10:30. She poured herself a cup and stood next to him for a moment, without saying anything, which was one of the things about Phoebe that Christopher appreciated. She did not perform concern. She simply stood in it. "You look like you heard something you weren't meant to hear," she said finally. "Probably," he said. She nodded. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not right now." She nodded again. She refilled his cup, even though it was still 3/4 full. It was a small, precise, entirely understood thing to do. The Ashby courier came a third time on a Wednesday in the second week of November. This time the wait was shorter because Vance had cleared his afternoon for it, but the woman arrived 20 minutes before the scheduled appointment and sat with her paperback and did not seem to mind. Christopher was on his way to the 4th-floor filing room when he passed through the lobby and saw her. He had been thinking about the stairwell as a walk, about the particular quality of the quiet in it, between floors, where the building's sound seemed to pool and soften. He used it for clearing his head when the days compressed, which they had been doing with some regularity since the first Friday of November. He thought about that stairwell now, standing in the lobby with a small stack of folders. And then he thought about the woman in the chair, and the book about the woman who inherits a house she is not sure is hers. He sat down in one of the hard lobby chairs. She looked up. "The other chair is open," she said. "I know," he said. "I wanted to sit here for a minute." She returned to her book. He sat with the folders in his lap and thought about what he was going to do with the documents in Ellen's files, and whether the answer was the same one it had been for 2 years, or whether the conversation through the open door had changed it. He sat for a few minutes, and then he said, without quite planning to, "Can I tell you something?" She looked up again. Her expression was the careful, neutral one she used when something had her attention. "You can," she said. He looked at the folders. "I'm not going to give you context," he said. "I just need to say it out loud to someone who doesn't know any of the parties." She closed the book. "All right," she said. He breathed once and said it quietly. He said that his father-in-law had added his own name to a parcel of land listed in the original trust documents, a piece of land in the county records under a different family's name, a name he had not recognized until he pulled the county deed index and found the original filing. He said the land had been a timber parcel, about 40 acres adjacent to the original Carson property. He said the document in Ellen's files showed his father-in-law's notation in the margin, a brief penciled line that said the parcel had been offered as restitution, voluntarily to the family that had originally held the deed, but that the notation had never been filed formally, and the restitution had apparently never reached them. He stopped. He had said more than he intended. He looked at the reception desk where Phoebe was on the phone, her back turned. Then the woman said, in a voice so quiet and so level that he needed a moment to understand that she had spoken at all. The family that held the deed was named Ashby. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the cover of her closed book. She set it on her knee and ran one thumb along the broken spine. "My grandfather's name was Roland Ashby," she said. "He received a letter 20 years ago from a Carson family attorney. The letter acknowledged the parcel. It said the notation had been made in good faith, but that the original filing had been lost in a records consolidation, and that the parcel had defaulted back to the Carson Trust." She paused. "He kept the letter. He kept everything. He spent the last years of his life trying to understand whether the loss was an error or a decision. Christopher did not speak. He sat in the hard chair and held what she had just said with both hands, figuratively, the way you hold something that requires your full attention because setting it down would mean it was gone. "He died thinking it was a decision," she said. There was a silence then that was not empty. It was the fullest silence Christopher had been inside in a long time. The kind that forms when two separate pieces of something true are brought next to each other, and the joining requires time. The stairwell door was visible from where they sat, and he was aware of it in a peripheral way, but neither of them was going anywhere. The lobby held them. "I didn't know," he said at last. "I know you didn't," she said. She said it without accusation, which was its own kind of weight. Phoebe finished her call. She replaced the handset and turned around. She saw Christopher and the woman sitting in the lobby chairs, both of them very still, and she recognized the texture of the moment well enough to pick up a folder and begin filing without speaking. The appointment with Vance lasted 40 minutes. Christopher was at his desk on the second floor when the courier went up and at his desk when she came back down, which meant he heard her steps on the stairwell going past his floor and the soft close of the lobby door 2 floors below. And then nothing. He sat for an hour doing a kind of work that looked like real work, but was mostly the occupation of hands, while a mind moves through a large space alone. He called the county deed office the next morning. He gave the parcel number from the original documents, the 40 acres noted in his father-in-law's handwriting. The clerk read him the chain of title slowly, and Christopher wrote it down. And the chain of title ended where he had suspected it might end, though the name at the end of it was new to him in a specific way. The current registered holder of the parcel, under a holding structure filed under the name Roland Ashby and Associates, was listed in the deed office records as M. Ashby, sole beneficiary and trustee. He set down his pen. He picked it up again and wrote the name a second time, neatly in the margin of his notepad. He went down to speak to Phoebe. She was entering something into the intake system with the unhurried concentration she brought to repetitive tasks, and she looked up when he stood at the edge of her desk. He told her what he had found. Not all of it, but the shape of it, the 40 acres, and the chain of title and the name at the end. Phoebe listened with her hands still on the keyboard, not typing. "She's coming back Thursday," Phoebe said. "For what?" "The final transfer of the Ashby estate documentation, the full manifest. Vance signs off and she takes the originals out of our custody." Christopher looked at the lobby chairs. Then he looked at the door to the stairwell. "Phoebe," he said. "Yes," she said. "The Thursday appointment. Is Diane on the attendee list?" Phoebe moved the mouse to her calendar view. She looked at it for a moment. "Trust review meeting," she said. Diane Carson requested it be included in the same session since several of the Ashby estate assets are adjacent to the Carson Trust holdings. She paused. Vance agreed. Apparently there's a shared deed index that requires both parties to be present. The shared deed index. The 40-acre parcel. The penciled notation in a margin. 22 years of a trust that had been built, in part on a restitution that had never been delivered. Christopher said, "Does Diane know who Ms. Ashby is?" Phoebe pulled up the appointment's contact file. She read it. Her expression did something small and careful. The contact entry lists M. Ashby, courier, and authorized representative, Ashby and Sons Holdings. She looked at Christopher. Diane's appointment confirmation just lists the Ashby estate as the counterparty. I don't think the full holding structure was in the brief she received. So Diane did not know. She knew the name Ashby the way you know the name of someone your grandfather wronged, as history, as distance, as a thing sufficiently old to be structural rather than personal. She did not know that Monsieur Ashby had been sitting in the lobby downstairs for 3 afternoons across 3 weeks. She did not know that the Ashby name, in the full holding structure that Phoebe's screen was currently showing, ran through Ashby and Sons Holdings and into a portfolio that held the building they were sitting in, the one at 114 Mercer Street, which was in the Carson Trust's county but under an entirely different taxonomy of ownership, and which had been, for 11 years, managed under a lease arrangement that Whitmore and Vance paid to a holding company whose name appeared in the firm's annual property filings in a font small enough to be routine. He read it twice on Phoebe's screen. Ashby and Sons Holdings. Property portfolio, Greater Metro and County Region. 17 buildings, of which 114 Mercer Street was the third on the list. Phoebe waited. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she confirmed. He went back upstairs. He pulled the original documents from Ellen's files, the ones he had put in the folder 2 years ago, and looked at every few months and returned to the folder. He read them again with the full picture now visible, which was a different experience than reading them with the partial picture, the way a map that was previously missing its western half becomes a different map when the western half arrives. He did not call Diane. He did not draft a letter. He did not make a strategy. He went home, made dinner, and sat in his kitchen with the folder on the table and the county deed, printout beside it. And he thought about what it meant that the woman who had listened to him in the lobby had already known the ground under the conversation, that she had let him speak anyway. Thursday arrived with a low grey sky and a wind that moved through the Mercer Street corridor in cold, direct gusts. Christopher wore his better jacket, the one he usually reserved for depositions. He was at his desk at 8:15. He retrieved the morning intake from the lobby drop box. He filed what needed filing. Diane arrived at 9:30, 45 minutes before the scheduled 10:15 appointment. She wore a charcoal blazer and the reading glasses that she used in formal settings as a kind of signal, a way of indicating she was there as someone who reviewed things, not as someone who was reviewed. She spoke to Phoebe with the brisk warmth of a woman who considers courtesy toward receptionists an index of her own character, asked whether the conference room was ready, and went upstairs without stopping at Christopher's office. The courier arrived at 10, carrying the transit case and the paperback, which she tucked into her coat pocket before she reached the desk. She was wearing the charcoal coat again, and her hair was down today, a small change that registered to Christopher when he came through the lobby at 10:05 and found her there. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything immediately, which was fine because neither of them needed to. He had found the deed index. She knew what was upstairs. They had been sitting on the same side of a closed door for 3 weeks, and now the door was open. "The chair is still uneven," she said. "I put a folded card under the front leg," he said. "The maintenance request has been pending since September." "Very resourceful," she said. He almost smiled. "Phoebe's idea." She set the transit case down beside Phoebe's desk. She did not sit. She stood with one hand resting lightly on the case's handle, and she looked at the stairwell door with the expression of a person who is measuring something. "Are you coming up?" she said. "I wasn't on the attendee list," he said. "I'll add you," she said. "I'm the authorized representative of the counterparty. I believe I have that standing." He considered the intake folder in his hands. He set it on Phoebe's desk. Phoebe, who had been tracking the conversation from her peripheral vision with the focused inattention of a person pretending very thoroughly to be elsewhere, picked it up without being asked. "4th floor," Phoebe said. They took the stairs. The conference room on the 4th floor had a long table, 6 chairs on each side, and a window that faced east, currently receiving the grey morning light in a way that made the whole room feel slightly provisional. Gerald Vance was already seated at the head of the table, A junior associate named Kevin sat beside him with a laptop, and the expression of someone who had been given a role in something he did not fully understand. Diane was at the table's far end. She was arranging a small stack of papers in front of her, the specific arrangement of a person who has arrived early, specifically to demonstrate that she arrived early. She looked up when the door opened and her expression moved through a quick sequence. Recognition of the woman with the transit case, a brief professional pleasantry forming, then the registration of Christopher behind her, then a recalibration too rapid for anyone to name. "Christopher," Diane said. Her voice was even. "I wasn't aware you were joining us." "I asked him to," said the woman. She crossed to the table and set the transit case down with a sound that was small and specific and somehow final, the way a period sounds at the end of a long sentence. Vance looked between them. "Shall we begin? I believe the initial order of business is the transfer of the Ashby Estate's original documentation, after which we can move to the Carson Trust adjacencies." He looked at the woman across the table. "If you could confirm your full name and authorization for our records." The woman opened the transit case's top clasp. She took out a document and laid it flat on the table. Then she looked at Vance and said, in the level, unornamented voice she used for everything, "Maren Ashby, sole trustee and principal owner of Ashby and Sons Holdings. Authorized representative for the Roland Ashby Estate, Roland Ashby and Associates, and all associated holding structures, including the property portfolio managed under Ashby and Sons Holdings, Greater Metro and County Region." Phoebe, who had come upstairs on a filing errand she had invented for herself at 9:58, was standing just inside the conference room door. She picked up the document manifest from the receiving tray beside the door, the one Kevin had printed and left there as a matter of procedure. She read from it in her clear, unhurried voice, the way she read from anything when she needed to be certain everyone in a room was hearing the same information. "Maren Ashby," Phoebe read, "principal owner, Ashby and Sons Holdings, registered address, 114 Mercer Street, Property Portfolio Division." She paused the way she paused when a line required a breath. "Building portfolio includes 114 Mercer Street, current property of record." The room received this. Kevin looked at his laptop, and then at Vance, and then at his laptop again. Vance was a man who had practiced law for 31 years and had developed, across those years, a very reliable internal mechanism for identifying the moment a room changed. He looked at Maren. He looked at the document she had laid on the table. He looked at Diane. Diane was looking at the document manifest in Phoebe's hand. She was looking at it with the expression of a person who has just understood that the room they have been navigating has had an extra wall in it the entire time. A wall they have been pressing against without knowing it was structural. "The property at 114 Mercer Street," Diane said. Her voice was careful. "The lease." "Is held by Whitmore and Vance," Maren said, "through a standard commercial lease agreement with Ashby and Sons Holdings. 11 years, renewed twice. The most recent renewal was signed in March." She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Diane set down her papers. She picked them up. She set them down again. The gesture was not large, but it was the most unguarded thing Christopher had seen her do in 22 years. "The 40-acre parcel," Christopher said. Maren looked at him. "Is in the deed index as Roland Ashby and Associates," he said, "under your trusteeship." He looked at Diane. The notation in the original Carson Trust documents, the one in Dad's handwriting, said the parcel was offered as restitution to the Ashby family. It was never filed. The restitution never reached them. Diane was very still. "I've had the documents for 2 years," Christopher said. He said it without inflection, without the scaffolding of accusation, He said it because it was true and because the room needed it to be said by someone who was not going to build anything on top of it. I didn't know what to do with them. The note in your father-in-law's file, Maren said to Christopher, and then she looked at Diane, is matched by a letter my grandfather kept for 20 years. The letter acknowledged the parcel. It said the filing was lost. She let that land for a moment. My grandfather didn't believe the filing was lost. He believed it was a decision. He spent the last part of his life trying to prove the difference, and he died not knowing. Vance cleared his throat. It was the clearing of a man who has just understood the full dimensions of what is on his table and is deciding, in real time, how to behave. This would appear to require a formal review of the Carson Trust's founding assets, he said slowly, with appropriate documentation from both parties. I have the documentation, Maren said. As do I, said Christopher. Diane picked up her stack of papers. She straightened them. She straightened them again, though they were already straight. She was doing the thing that people do when the script has stopped running, and the hands need an occupation, while the mind catches up. When she finally spoke, her voice had the flatness of something that has been relieved of its pretense. I didn't know about the letter, she said. My mother handled the original trust. I only knew what she told me. She paused. She told me the notation was a formality, that nothing had come of it. Nothing came of it, Christopher said, because the restitution was never delivered. Diane looked at the table. She did not look at Maren. She looked at the table the way a person looks at a surface they would like to become, flat and without features. I'll need to review the full file, she said. It was not an apology. It was the sound of a woman whose authority over the family narrative had reached the edge of the territory it was able to govern, and who was, for the first time in a long time, standing at that edge without knowing what was on the other side. Vance scheduled a formal review meeting for the following Thursday. He assigned Kevin to prepare a document inventory from both parties' files. He was thorough and unhurried, the way he was at every deposition, and he spoke to Maren and to Christopher with the same measured attention, which was a small thing and a correct one. Maren signed the transfer paperwork for the Ashby estate documents. Christopher initialed the intake acknowledgement, his function as the firm's probate paralegal, coinciding for perhaps the first time in 6 years with something that felt like purpose rather than procedure. Phoebe collected the transfer copies and filed them with the clean efficiency she brought to everything, and when she crossed behind Christopher on her way to the door, she put one hand briefly on his shoulder, a light pressure, there and then gone. Diane left at 11:40 without looking at Christopher. This was different from the way she usually did not look at him, which was the not looking of a woman with her attention directed elsewhere. This was the not looking of a woman who understood, now, that looking would require something she had not yet worked out how to offer. He would not wait for her to work it out. He had waited a long time for a great many things in that family, and the waiting had not produced what he had thought it would produce. He was not angry about this. He was simply clear, the way a room is clear when someone opens a window. He went downstairs at noon. He collected his jacket from his office chair and walked through the second floor and down the single flight to the lobby, where the chairs still sat at the angles in which they had been arranged since the building was first let, where the reception desk still held the slightly dented coffee tin with the shortbread biscuits, where the front left chair leg still leaned despite the folded card, which had slipped at some point in the morning. He was standing by the window, looking at the grey sky above Mercer Street, when he heard the stairwell door open behind him. Maren crossed the lobby. She had her coat on and the transit case in her left hand, the empty one, returned to her custody after the transfer was complete. Her paperback was in her right coat pocket, the broken spine visible. She came to stand beside him at the window. They stood for a moment without speaking, which had by now become one of the more natural things they did together. "The formal review," Christopher said. "Is that something you initiated, or was it always part of the plan?" "It was always part of why I came," she said. "But I didn't know about the notation in your father-in-law's documents. That was yours." She glanced at him. "I had my grandfather's half. You had the other." He thought about the sentence he had whispered in the lobby, the one she had completed without hesitation, the way a person completes a sentence they have been waiting to hear the beginning of for a very long time. "Your grandfather," he said. "Did he know the restitution had been offered, that someone in that family had wanted to correct it?" "He suspected," she said. "He kept the letter because he suspected. He wanted to believe it." She looked at the window. "I wanted to give him the answer while he was still here. I didn't get there in time." The sky above Mercer Street was still grey, but the wind had dropped, and the light had that particular November quality of being thin and very precise, the kind that shows you exactly what is in a room rather than softening it. "The parcel," he said, "is already in the review documentation," she said. "It'll take a few months, but the chain of title is straightforward once the notation and the letter are read together." She looked at him. "It was never about the land, for my grandfather. It was about whether the loss was a mistake or a choice." "It was both," Christopher said, "and neither of them was mine to answer for." He paused. "I should have brought the documents forward 2 years ago." "You didn't know where to bring them," she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the direct, level attention he had first registered over the top of her paperback on a Tuesday in late October. The attention of a person who sees you without the frame of what you might be useful for. And he understood, in the particular way that things become understood when the full picture has finally arrived, that she had been sitting in that lobby for 3 visits, not only because Vance's depositions ran long. He had offered her a chair and coffee and a piece of shortbread on a morning when no one was watching, and she had not needed any of it. Not the coffee, not the biscuits, not the chair. She could have had the chair simply by asking Phoebe. She had let him offer, because the offering was what she had come, in the particular private calculus of a woman with her grandfather's letter in her coat pocket, to see. He had passed. He had not known he was being tested, and he had passed. She held the transit case lightly at her side. He stood with his jacket over his arm. The lobby was quiet in the particular way of a building in the middle of a working day, a background of small sounds, the elevator's distant mechanism, a phone on the second floor, the wind's low movement against the glass. "The chair," she said, and glanced at the front left guest chair, which sat where it had always sat, slightly lower on one side. "You reported the uneven leg in September. Maintenance form, 3rd copy of the request. And it's still uneven." "The building manager," he said carefully, "might respond faster to a request from the building owner." She looked at the chair for a moment. Then she looked at him, and the thing in her expression was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, the small, precise warmth of a person who recognizes that a dry truth has been offered to them without performance. "I'll look into it," she said. She crossed the lobby toward the door. She had almost reached the glass when she stopped and turned, one hand on the frame. "Thursday," she said. "The review meeting. Will you be there?" "I have the documents," he said. "You do," she said. She pushed the door open and the November wind came through for a moment, cold and clean. And then she was on the other side of the glass, the transit case at her side, the broken-spined paperback in her coat pocket, and Christopher stood in the lobby of a building he had worked in for 6 years, and now understood slightly differently, in the way that a room changes when you finally know whose room it is. He turned. Phoebe was at the top of the stairs, leaning against the railing with the cup of coffee she had clearly carried down from the second-floor kitchenette, specifically for him. She held it out. He walked up the 3 steps from the lobby floor and took the cup. It was warm in his hands. Outside, the thin November light was doing what it did, showing everything exactly as it was.